20 years ago, a 37-year-old man left his home in Deltona, Florida, to meet a business associate on a May afternoon, then vanished without a trace just a few hours later, leaving his family devastated and his vehicle abandoned near Blue Springs State Park. Authorities quickly suspected the man who was last known to have met him that day, but with no body found and virtually no strong leads to pursue, the investigation eventually stalled and the case was moved to cold case status. However, throughout all the years that followed, the victim's family never gave up hope that one day the truth about what happened would be uncovered. Then, one day, during excavation work at a nearby construction site, workers discovered something buried deep underground, a find that would bring the entire case back into the light and change everything investigators once believed to be true. Before we dive deeper into this mysterious cold case, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy true crime investigation stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. Some names and details in this story have been changed to ensure anonymity and privacy. Not all photos are from the actual scene. Deltona, a city located in western Volusia County, Florida, developed from residential neighborhoods along small roads and low-lying strips of land near the St. Johns River, is home to tens of thousands of residents who work in nearby industrial areas and cities, such as Sanford and Daytona Beach. And in the spring of 2004, life there still followed the familiar rhythm of a quiet suburban community where most families had lived for many years. In a neighborhood not far from Howland Boulevard, 37-year-old Andrew Keller lived with his family in a single-story house at the end of a row overlooking an empty lot covered in weeds. Andrew worked in the technical services field and frequently traveled around Central Florida to meet clients and business partners. His immediate family consisted of his wife Rachel Keller and their 6-year-old daughter Madison. The entire family had lived in Deltona for many years and was familiar with most of the neighbors in the neighborhood. The afternoon of May 17, 2004, began like many other days in the Keller household. Around after 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Andrew prepared to leave home to meet an acquaintance regarding a business transaction he had mentioned in the days prior. Rachel confirmed that her husband left the house around 5:30 p.m., driving the dark green Ford Explorer he usually used when traveling in the area. Before leaving, Andrew told his wife that the meeting would take place near the Blue Springs State Park area, not far north of Deltona. Rachel watched the vehicle leave the small road in front of the house, and that was the last time she saw her husband that day. As originally planned, the meeting was expected to be brief before Andrew returned home in the evening. However, as darkness fell, Andrew did not return at his usual time. Rachel began calling her husband's cell phone, but the calls went unanswered. In the first few hours, the family assumed the meeting might have run longer than expected, or that Andrew had to handle business elsewhere in the area. But as the night wore on with no contact whatsoever, concern began to mount. Andrew's phone continued to go unanswered, and the Ford Explorer did not appear in front of the house. The next morning, May 18, 2004, Rachel, along with some relatives, began searching the areas around Deltona, checking roads Andrew might have taken and parking lots near public areas in the city. However, they found no sign that Andrew had returned to the area. By the afternoon, with Andrew still not appearing and the family having no information about his whereabouts, Rachel Keller contacted the Volusia County Sheriff's Office to report that her husband was missing. On the afternoon of May 18, 2004, Rachel Keller's call was transferred to the on-duty division of the Volusia County Sheriff's Office, where staff received information about an adult missing person case in Deltona. After confirming the reporter's identity and residence address, the on-duty officer recorded the initial information into the system and transferred the case to the investigative division responsible for the area. Following the sheriff's office procedure for a missing person report, an official file was opened under the name of Andrew Keller, 37 years old, residing in Deltona, Volusia County, Florida. Basic personal information about Andrew was recorded, including date of birth, occupation, home address, usual vehicle, and identifying characteristics provided by the family. Investigators also noted that Andrew Keller lived with his wife Rachel Keller and 6-year-old daughter in a home in the western residential area of Deltona. After the file was established, investigators began gathering more detailed information from Rachel about what happened on May 17. Rachel stated that her husband left home around 5:30 p.m. that day to meet an acquaintance regarding a business transaction. She confirmed that Andrew drove the dark green Ford Explorer and said the meeting was expected to take place near the Blue Springs State Park area. Rachel also provided information that her husband frequently used his cell phone during business meetings, but since the evening of May 17, His phone had stopped answering calls. Investigators recorded the time Andrew left home as the last point directly confirmed by the family. In addition to Rachel, investigators asked about any other activities Andrew had that day, including his workplace, other appointments, or people he may have contacted before leaving home. Rachel said that on May 17, Andrew worked normally and did not mention any travel plans other than the business meeting in the afternoon. Investigators recorded this information as part of the timeline of the victim's last known activities. During the filing process, officers also collected a detailed description of Andrew's vehicle, including make, color, and license plate of the Ford Explorer, to aid in identifying the vehicle if located in the area. At the same time, investigators asked Rachel to provide information about the person Andrew intended to meet that afternoon. Rachel confirmed that this person was Derek Lawson, an acquaintance of Andrew in the business field with whom he had been communicating in recent weeks. Derek Lawson's name was recorded in the investigative file as an individual directly connected to Andrew Keller's last known meeting. After completing the collection of initial information, investigators began compiling data to precisely determine Andrew Keller's last activities before losing contact. The recorded information showed that on the afternoon of May 17, 2004, Andrew left home in Deltona, drove his Ford Explorer to a business meeting near the Blue Springs State Park area, and from that point onward, the family received no calls or messages from him. The time of departure, means of transportation, and purpose of the meeting were quickly entered into the file as the last verifiable details in Andrew's schedule before he disappeared. However, amid all these facts, one detail in particular caught the investigators' attention: the person Andrew intended to meet that afternoon. In her initial statement, Rachel Keller said this man was named Derek Lawson, a business acquaintance whom Andrew had mentioned several times in the weeks before he went missing, with Derek Lawson being the one reportedly having a direct in-person meeting with Andrew on the day he disappeared. His name was quickly added to the investigative file as the first individual to be verified as investigators began tracing people connected to Andrew Keller's final activities. Investigators started by gathering basic information about Derek Lawson through local databases, identifying his residence address, occupation, and known connections in the Volusia County area. Initial results showed Derek Lawson resided in a neighborhood not too far from Deltona and was involved in some small business activities related to local services and investments. This information aligned with what Rachel Keller had provided when describing the planned meeting between Andrew and Derek as an exchange related to a business opportunity the two had discussed earlier. After confirming Derek Lawson's identity, investigators moved to the next step of verifying the relationship between Derek and Andrew Keller. Through preliminary interviews with family members and review of contact information provided by Rachel, investigators confirmed that Andrew and Derek had known each other for some period of time and had communicated about certain business plans. The relationship was described as a casual acquaintance in the small investment field, where the two occasionally exchanged information about collaboration opportunities. To determine the exact extent of contact between the two on the day Andrew went missing, investigators continued examining Andrew Keller's communication data, including phone calls recorded on May 17. Through data provided by the carrier, they began compiling a list of phone numbers that contacted Andrew that day and determining the timing of each call. During the analysis of these records, investigators discovered that one of the last recorded calls on Andrew's phone was to a number registered under Derek Lawson's name. The timing of this call coincided with the period shortly before Andrew left home on the afternoon of May 17. Investigators noted this detail in the file because it provided evidence that Andrew and Derek had communicated right before the planned meeting. After confirming that the phone number belonging to Derek Lawson had contacted Andrew on the day he went missing, investigators continued checking for any additional calls between the two in the days prior. Analysis of the data showed the two had communicated multiple times in the period leading up to May 17, reinforcing the conclusion that the meeting was pre-planned rather than spontaneous. This information was recorded as part of the communication timeline between Andrew Keller and Derek Lawson before Andrew disappeared. Based on data collected from the family, phone call records, and the process of verifying Derek Lawson's identity, investigators reached an initial conclusion that Derek was the last person known to have had direct contact with Andrew Keller before he went missing. Identifying Derek Lawson as the last person to communicate with and plan to meet Andrew quickly became a focal point in the investigative file, as it helped investigators narrow the scope and focus on clarifying what happened in a time from when Andrew left home on the afternoon of May 17 until the family completely lost contact with him. While Volusia County Sheriff's Office investigators were still continuing to gather information surrounding this meeting and attempting to reconstruct Andrew Keller's final activities, an unexpected new development emerged on the morning of May 19, 2004. The Sheriff's Office Dispatch Center received a call from a local resident reporting an unusually parked sport utility vehicle beside a dirt road leading into the pine woods south of Blue Spring State Park. According to the caller, the vehicle had appeared at that location the previous evening and remained there into the next morning, but no one had returned to use it. This information was relayed to patrol officers working in the area, and a police unit was dispatched to check the described location. When officers arrived, they discovered a dark green Ford Explorer parked on the shoulder of the dirt road, not far from a secondary entrance to the park area. The vehicle was parked facing the pine woods, and the surrounding area consisted of sandy soil and low grass with little sign of other vehicle activity. Officers checked the vehicle's license plate and confirmed that this Ford Explorer was registered to Andrew Keller, the individual whose family had reported him missing in Deltona the previous day. After confirming the vehicle belonged to Andrew Keller, officers immediately notified the investigative team handling the missing person file at the sheriff's office. Investigators quickly determined that the vehicle could be one of the most important physical clues related to Andrew's disappearance. To preserve the scene, the area around the vehicle was marked with police crime scene tape, and patrol officers were stationed to prevent any civilians or vehicles from approaching the car before the forensics team arrived. Securing the scene ensured that any evidence potentially related to Andrew Keller's disappearance would not be disturbed or destroyed before being officially documented. A team from the Volusia County Sheriff's Office Crime Scene Investigation Unit was then dispatched to the scene to process the vehicle. Upon arrival, the forensics team began by documenting the exact position of the vehicle through scene photographs and location diagrams. Investigators also recorded the direction the vehicle was facing, the distance from the vehicle to the main road, and the condition of the surrounding parking area. The vehicle doors were observed from the outside to determine if there were signs of being opened or tampered with before direct access. After completing initial scene photography, the forensics team began the standard vehicle examination procedure. Investigators checked the doors, windows, and trunk to see if there were any signs the vehicle had been opened or used by someone else after being parked at this location. The interior of the vehicle was thoroughly observed to document the condition of the seats, dashboard, and any items present in the vehicle at the time of discovery. At the same time, the area around the vehicle was checked for any traces that might relate to the victim's movement or any other individuals present in the area. Investigators continued documenting the entire condition of Andrew Keller's vehicle as part of the investigative file. Since the discovery of the Ford Explorer near Blue Spring State Park provided a key physical anchor point related to the victim's last known location before he disappeared. After the area around Andrew Keller's Ford Explorer was secured and the Volusia County Sheriff's Office Crime Scene Investigation Team completed overall scene photography, the vehicle examination process proceeded according to standard crime scene investigation steps. Forensic technicians began by examining the exterior of the vehicle, particularly focusing on frequently touched areas such as door handles, window frames, and areas near the locks. Fingerprint powder was applied to the metal surfaces of the driver's side and passenger side door handles to collect any latent fingerprints that might remain. The technicians then continued checking the rear door handles and trunk lid. Any fingerprints found were documented, marked, and lifted with specialized tape to be sent to the Sheriff's Office Fingerprint Analysis Lab. After completing exterior fingerprint collection, the forensics team opened the vehicle to conduct an interior cabin examination. The steering wheel, gear shift, dashboard, and interior door handles were further checked with fingerprint powder to collect any traces that might identify individuals who had contacted the vehicle near the time it was parked at the scene. Fingerprints found on the steering wheel and dashboard were photographed before being collected according to procedure. Concurrently with fingerprint processing, another group of technicians examined the ground area surrounding the vehicle. Since the Ford Explorer was parked on sandy soil and low grass near the edge of the dirt road leading into the Pine Woods area, the surface conditions allowed investigators to observe the potential presence of shoe or footprints in the vicinity. Investigators began surveying the area in front of and behind the vehicle, then expanded the search radius several meters around the vehicle. Several faint shoe impressions were discovered on the sandy soil near the driver's side door, and these were marked with scene stakes to record their exact positions. Technicians photographed each shoe impression from multiple angles before measuring their size and spacing. These shoe impressions were then documented in the scene diagram as part of the investigative record. In addition to collecting fingerprints and shoe impressions, The forensics team also documented the precise location of the Ford Explorer relative to the dirt road and surrounding area. A scene diagram was created to determine the vehicle's facing direction, distance from the vehicle to the road edge, and the direction the front of the vehicle pointed toward the pine woods. Investigators noted that the vehicle was parked parallel to the dirt road and not in a position blocking or deviating from normal vehicle travel. Information about the vehicle's position and orientation was recorded as part of determining the circumstances under which the vehicle was brought to this location. After completing documentation of the vehicle's position and surrounding traces, investigators continued checking the overall condition of the Ford Explorer to determine if there were any signs the vehicle had been in an accident or collision during travel. The front end, front bumper, and rear bumper were inspected for scratches, dents, or damage. The vehicle doors and windows were also observed for signs of broken glass or heavy impact. After completing the inspection of the entire interior and exterior of the Ford Explorer, investigators also thoroughly searched inside the vehicle for signs of struggle, disturbance, or any unusual traces that might indicate a violent incident had occurred. However, the scene examination results showed no signs of a traffic accident in the area. The vehicle body had no significant collision marks, no evidence of loss of control, and no proof that the vehicle had left the road during travel. All these observations were entered into the scene record as part of the examination process of the vehicle, directly related to Andrew Keller's disappearance. When the examination of the Ford Explorer concluded and the initial physical evidence had been documented, the Volusia County Sheriff's Office investigative team began shifting focus to another source of data that could help reconstruct the final hours before Andrew Keller disappeared: his phone communication records. Since Andrew frequently used his cell phone for work and business exchanges, investigators determined that call data could provide critical clues about who had contacted him on May 17, 2004, as well as help identify the victim's final activities before going missing. Following investigative procedure, the Sheriff's Office submitted a formal request to the mobile carrier providing service to Andrew Keller to obtain detailed call records related to his phone number. This request included a list of all incoming and outgoing calls in the days before and after the victim went missing to facilitate building an accurate communication timeline. After the carrier responded to the investigative agency's request, investigators received the call data records including contacted phone numbers, call times, and duration of each call. This data was forwarded to the investigative team for detailed analysis. Investigators began by compiling a full list of calls recorded on May 17, 2004, the day Andrew Keller left home in the afternoon for the business meeting. Each call was arranged chronologically to determine the sequence of the victim's communications that day. This process allowed investigators to identify individuals who had contacted Andrew in the period before he disappeared, and to better understand the victim's communication activities in his last known hours. In the list of recorded calls, investigators paid particular attention to calls occurring on the afternoon of May 17, as that was the time frame when Andrew left home for the family-confirmed meeting. Call data showed that Andrew had made and received several work-related calls in the morning and early afternoon, consistent with the family's description of his usual daily work routine. However, as investigators continued analyzing the records, they discovered a call placed between Andrew Keller and a phone number registered to Derek Lawson late that afternoon. The timing of this call coincided with the period immediately before Andrew left home for the planned meeting. This detail was flagged in the investigative file because it corroborated the earlier family-provided information that Andrew intended to meet Derek Lawson that afternoon. After identifying the calls on the day of disappearance, investigators focused on determining the last recorded call in Andrew Keller's phone data. By rearranging the records chronologically, they determined that the last recorded call between Andrew and a phone number belonging to Derek Lawson occurred very close to the time Andrew left home. This made that call the last known communication of the victim before he went missing. In addition to identifying the calls, investigators also examined cell tower location data recorded in the carrier's logs. Each mobile call is typically routed through a tower near the phone's location at the time the call was made or received. By analyzing this information, investigators could determine the approximate geographic area where Andrew Keller's phone connected to the mobile network on the day he went missing. Initial data showed that calls made on the afternoon of May 17 connected to cell towers in the Volusia County area, including those near Deltona and the vicinity of Blue Spring State Park. Information about the locations of these cell towers was recorded as part of the investigative file, as it provided additional data points for comparison with other information related to Andrew Keller's travel before he disappeared. After the call data from the carrier was analyzed and confirmed that Derek Lawson was the last person to communicate with Andrew Keller on May 17, 2004, investigators from the Volusia County Sheriff's Office decided to invite Derek to the station for formal questioning. Contact was made with Derek Lawson, and he agreed to come to the sheriff's office to discuss with investigators the meeting that Andrew Keller had mentioned before going missing. The interview was conducted in the investigative division's office, where two investigators assigned to the case began by confirming Derek Lawson's identity, residence address, and his relationship with Andrew Keller. Derek confirmed that he knew Andrew through some activities related to small investments and business in the Volusia County area, and that the two had communicated about a few collaboration opportunities in the weeks leading up to Andrew's disappearance. When asked about May 17, 2004, Derek acknowledged that he had met Andrew that afternoon. According to Derek, the meeting was arranged after the two exchanged phone calls during the day to discuss a business proposal that Andrew wanted to talk about in person. Derek stated that the meeting location was near the Blue Springs State Park area, consistent with the information Rachel Keller had previously provided to the police. Investigators asked Derek to describe in detail how the meeting was arranged and the timing of their communications before Andrew left home. Derek explained that Andrew had called him late in the afternoon to confirm the meeting, and the two agreed to meet near a dirt road leading into the Pine Woods area near the park. Investigators noted that this statement aligned with the call data they had received from the carrier. When asked about the course of the meeting, Derek provided his version of events, stating that Andrew had driven the Ford Explorer to the meeting spot, and the two talked briefly about business matters Andrew was considering. According to Derek, the exchange proceeded normally with no arguments or any unusual incidents during their conversation. Derek also said the meeting lasted only a short time before Andrew said he needed to leave to head home. Per Derek's description, Andrew was the one who left the location first, and afterward Derek also departed the area to return to his residence. Investigators continued asking questions to determine the exact timing of the meeting and the period the two were present at the location. Derek said he arrived in the area near Blue Springs State Park sometime after 6 o'clock in the evening, and the meeting with Andrew took place over a short period before the two left in different directions. When asked about Andrew's condition during the meeting, Derek replied that Andrew showed no unusual behavior, and their discussion focused solely on business matters. Throughout the interview process, investigators documented Derek Lawson's entire statement, including details about arranging the meeting location, the time Andrew arrived, and the time Derek claimed Andrew left the area. These details were recorded in the investigative file as part of the timeline related to Andrew Keller's final known activities before he went missing. Investigators also noted that Derek Lawson admitted to being in the area near Blue Springs State Park on the afternoon of May 17, 2004, and confirmed that he had met Andrew Keller at that location, making Derek the last known person to have met the victim in person before Andrew disappeared. When the initial interview with Derek Lawson concluded and a statement was recorded in the investigative file, investigators from the Volusia County Sheriff's Office proceeded to the next step in verifying the statement of the individual identified as the last person to meet Andrew Keller. The goal of this step was to check the accuracy of what Derek had presented regarding his activities on the afternoon and evening of May 17, 2004. Investigators first reconstructed the timeline Derek provided during the interview, including the time he said he left his residence to go to the meeting spot, the time he met Andrew Keller near the Blue Springs State Park area, and the activities Derek claimed to have carried out after the meeting ended. This timeline was compared with the information already collected from phone call data and initial facts related to Andrew's disappearance. After establishing a preliminary timeline, investigators began verifying each part of the schedule Derek Lawson had reported. Derek stated that after leaving the area near Blue Springs State Park on the evening of May 17, he traveled to several locations in Volusia County before returning to his residence. To verify this information, investigators worked to precisely identify the locations Derek said he visited, including the roads he claimed to have traveled, and the areas where he said he stopped during the period after meeting Andrew Keller. A team of investigators was assigned to each of these locations to conduct on-site checks of the areas, determining whether the locations matched the route Derek had described. Investigators also checked the distances and travel times between points in Derek's schedule to assess whether the timeline he provided was reasonable in terms of time. During this verification process, investigators also sought sources of information that could confirm Derek's presence at the locations he had reported. This included contacting businesses or public places in the area to ask if anyone remembered seeing Derek Lawson on the evening of May 17. Investigators also inquired with residents living near the locations Derek said he passed through, to determine if any witnesses could confirm his appearance in those areas during the relevant time frame. In addition to seeking direct witnesses, investigators also checked for any traces or information that could confirm Derek's movements in the period after meeting Andrew Keller. Each location Derek mentioned was documented in the verification file and compared with other data the investigative team had previously collected. In some cases, investigators returned to areas near Blue Springs State Park, where Derek said he had left after the meeting with Andrew ended, to determine whether the route Derek described matched the actual conditions of the area. The results of this verification process were recorded in the investigative file as part of the effort to check the accuracy of Derek Lawson's statement. Each checked location was marked on the investigative map, and information gathered from those interviewed was noted for cross-referencing with Derek's initial statement. Through examining the schedule Derek Lawson provided, investigators from the Volusia County Sheriff's Office attempted to determine whether the activities Derek described after meeting Andrew Keller could be corroborated by witnesses or objective elements in the area, thereby assessing the level of reliability of the statement he gave during the prior interview. After the steps to verify Derek Lawson's statement were carried out, and investigators still had not determined Andrew Keller's whereabouts after the meeting believed to have occurred near Blue Spring State Park, the Volusia County Sheriff's Office decided to expand the investigation to include on-the-ground search operations in the area considered the last point where the victim may have been present. Blue Spring State Park is located north of Deltona and includes extensive pine woods, interspersed clearings, and small dirt roads leading deep into the natural area. Since Andrew Keller's Ford Explorer had been found near this area, investigators determined that conducting a systematic search in the vicinity was a necessary step to determine whether the victim may have left the vehicle there. The Sheriff's Office therefore organized a search team involving patrol officers, investigators, and support personnel from other units within the agency. The area was divided into multiple small segments to ensure the search could proceed methodically by checking each section systematically. Search teams were assigned to enter the Pine Woods area near the dirt road where the Ford Explorer was discovered, beginning by checking natural paths, clearings, and areas showing possible human access. During this process, officers moved in a spread-out formation to observe the ground, trees, and surrounding areas for any signs potentially related to Andrew Keller's disappearance, such as footprints, personal items, or traces indicating someone had recently moved through the area. In addition to personnel searches, the Sheriff's Office also deployed trained K-9 units to assist in identifying scent trails related to the victim. The dogs were brought to the area near the Ford Explorer, considered a logical starting point for searching for any scent trails that might lead to Andrew Keller's direction of movement after leaving the vehicle. K-9 handlers led the dogs through the area around the vehicle and then directed them into paths within the pine woods to determine if any scent signs led away from the parking area. While the K-9 teams operated, officers continued checking the interspersed clearing areas within the woods, where flat terrain and sparse trees could make ground traces more visible. Investigators also paid attention to low-lying areas or spots potentially obscured by dense trees, as these could be places where a person might stop or move without being easily detected from main roads. Throughout the search process, every checked area was marked on the investigative map to ensure no part of the area was overlooked. Search groups moved step by step through the pre-designated segments, reporting back to the Coordination Center any signs that might require further examination. The search operation at Blue Springs State Park lasted for many hours as teams continued sweeping the woods and clearings near where the Ford Explorer was found, with the goal of determining whether Andrew Keller may have left the vehicle and moved into the surrounding natural area. The deployment of K-9 units alongside ground search teams was carried out to increase the likelihood of detecting any traces related to the victim, while also helping investigators assess the possibility that Andrew Keller had left the vehicle in this area before losing contact with his family. While Volusia County Sheriff's Office search teams continued sweeping the pine woods and clearings near Blue Springs State Park, a group of officers moving through an area about several dozen meters from where Andrew Keller's Ford Explorer was discovered was noticed an object lying on the sandy ground near the edge of a small path leading into the woods. Upon approaching the area, Officers observed that the object had the shape of a personal item typically carried in pants pockets or shirt pockets. Following scene handling procedure, officers did not touch the object directly, but first reported the discovery to the on-scene investigator for preliminary assessment. When the investigator and forensic technicians arrived at the reported location, they conducted a closer observation and determined that the object could potentially be related to Andrew Keller based on the initial description of personal items the family had provided earlier. During the missing person filing process, recognizing this could be an important clue, investigators decided to treat the area as an official evidence discovery point. Before proceeding with collection, the forensics team began by marking the discovery position on the ground. A scene marker stake was placed next to the object, and the surrounding area was photographed from multiple angles to accurately document the evidence's position relative to the environment. Scene photographs included close-up images of the object and overall views of the area, allowing investigators to determine the evidence's location in relation to the dirt road and the area where the Ford Explorer was previously found. After completing scene image documentation, investigators proceeded to map the evidence discovery position on the investigative map of the Blue Spring State Park area. This diagram clearly indicated the relative distance between the evidence and landmarks in the area, including the position of the Ford Explorer and paths within the pine woods. Marking the precise location of the evidence helped investigators reconstruct the context of the area at the time of discovery and supported analysis of possible events that may have occurred there. Once scene documentation steps were complete, forensic technicians proceeded to collect the evidence according to standard procedure. The object was picked up using protective gloves to avoid contaminating any potential traces on the surface. The evidence was then placed into a specialized evidence bag and sealed on site. On the evidence bag, investigators recorded details including the collection time, discovery location, and the name of the person performing the collection to ensure the chain of custody was maintained in accordance with agency regulations. During continued searching around this area, search teams also discovered several other objects scattered in the nearby vicinity. Each object was handled using the same procedure, the discovery area was marked, scene photographs were taken, and the evidence was collected using specialized equipment. All objects believed to be potentially related to Andrew Keller were sealed separately in individual evidence bags to prevent cross-contamination of traces. After completing collection at the scene, all evidence was logged into the case evidence list and transported to Volusia County Sheriff's Office headquarters. There, the evidence bags were handed over to the Evidence Management Division before being sent to the forensics lab for more detailed analysis. Sending these items to the forensics lab aimed to determine whether they truly belonged to Andrew Keller, while also checking for the presence of biological traces, fingerprints, or any other indicators that could provide additional information about what happened in the area near Blue Spring State Park during the period when Andrew Keller disappeared. After the evidence discovered and collected in the Pine Woods area near Blue Spring State Park was transferred to the forensics lab for analysis, investigators from the Volusia County Sheriff's Office continued expanding the search to surrounding natural areas, particularly the St. Johns River area, near where Andrew Keller's Ford Explorer was found. The St. Johns River is a large river flowing through Volusia County, with several access points near Blue Spring State Park via natural paths, small boat ramps, and dirt roads leading to the riverbank. Investigators determined that if Andrew Keller had left his vehicle near the park area, the possibility of him accessing the riverbank was a direction that needed to be checked. For that reason, the Sheriff's Office decided to deploy a specialized dive team to conduct underwater searches in the areas closest to the vehicle's discovery location. A dive team from the Search and Rescue Unit was dispatched to the scene along with investigators assigned to the case. Before beginning underwater search operations, investigators surveyed the riverbank area to identify convenient access points for the dive team. Selected areas included riverbank sections with paths leading from the pine woods, small boat ramps used by local residents, and locations near bridges where vehicles could approach close to the water. These positions were marked on the investigative map to organize the search systematically. After the search points were identified, the dive team began deploying equipment at a small boat ramp not far from Blue Spring State Park. Divers prepared diving gear, safety lines, and communication systems before entering the water to check the riverbed area. One investigator was assigned to document the entire search process, including the starting dive location, the diver's directions of movement, and the areas already checked. The objective of this operation was to determine whether there were any signs indicating Andrew Keller may have fallen into or been taken into the river in the period after he went missing. Divers moved along the riverbed area near the shore, before expanding the search range farther out. Visibility underwater in the St. Strait John's River was quite limited due to silt and natural materials suspended in the water, so divers had to proceed by carefully checking each small area. While the dive team worked underwater, officers on shore continued observing the river surface and checking areas around the boat ramp for any unusual signs potentially related to Andrew Keller's disappearance. After completing the check of the first boat ramp area, the dive team moved to another river section near a bridge in the area. Investigators determined that the bridge could be another access point where a person might reach the water's edge, or where a vehicle could stop near the riverbank. At the area near the bridge, the dive team repeated the same underwater search procedure as at the previous boat ramp, checking the riverbed and areas where larger objects might accumulate. Officers on shore simultaneously checked both sides of the water's edge to determine if there were signs of soil slippage, footprints, or any traces indicating someone had recently approached the area. The search operation at multiple points along the St. Johns River continued for many hours as the dive team systematically checked the areas marked on the investigative map. Each river section was swept methodically to ensure no potentially relevant areas related to Andrew Keller's disappearance were overlooked. However, after completing checks of the boat ramp areas and the river section near the bridge within the initial search range, the dive team did not discover a body or any large objects directly related to Andrew Keller on the riverbed. The underwater search results were recorded in the investigative file as part of the search efforts conducted in the St. Johns River area in the early days after Andrew Keller was reported missing, when search efforts in the Pine Woods area near Blue Spring State Park and along the St. Creolids, Johns River yielded no signs indicating Andrew Keller's location. Investigators from the Volusia County Sheriff's Office shifted focus to analyzing the victim's financial activities to determine whether Andrew continued using his personal financial resources after the time he was reported missing. Following investigative procedure for adult missing persons cases, checking the victim's bank accounts and payment methods is a critical step to determine if the person continued conducting financial transactions after losing contact. Investigators began by gathering information from the Keller family about the banks Andrew typically used as well as the types of credit cards he carried. Rachel Keller provided the investigative agency with information about the bank where Andrew maintained his personal account and the family's joint account, along with the most recent statements she could find at home. Based on this information, the Sheriff's Office sent formal requests to the relevant financial institutions to obtain Andrew Keller's transaction history for the period before and after May 17, 2004. After receiving responses from the banks, investigators began detailed examination of the transaction records related to Andrew Keller's accounts. These records included ATM withdrawals, debit card payments, and transfers made in the days before Andrew disappeared. Investigators arranged the transactions chronologically to identify the last recorded financial activity before Andrew left home on the afternoon of May 17. Bank data showed Andrew had conducted several normal transactions in the days leading up to his disappearance, including payments for daily living expenses and some small purchases at stores in the Deltona area. These transactions aligned with Andrew's usual daily routine and showed no unusual signs in his financial activity before May 17. After identifying transactions before Andrew left home, investigators shifted to checking for any transactions occurring after he was reported missing. To do this, they reviewed all transactions in the bank accounts and compared them to the time the family confirmed losing contact with Andrew. At the same time, investigators requested credit card issuers to provide detailed records of usage for credit cards in Andrew Keller's name. These records included all purchase transactions, service payments, and any fees incurred during the relevant period. After collecting data from financial institutions, investigators proceeded with analysis to determine whether any credit card transactions were made using Andrew's cards after May 17. They examined each transaction in the list, paying particular attention to those occurring after Andrew left home for the meeting near Blue Spring State Park. The analysis results showed that no bank transactions or credit card transactions were recorded after the time Andrew Keller was reported missing by his family. There were no ATM withdrawals, no card purchases, and no signs that Andrew's financial accounts had been accessed after May 17, 2004. This information was recorded in the investigative file as an important factor in assessing the likelihood that Andrew Keller continued normal activities after disappearing. The absence of any financial transactions after the disappearance indicated that Andrew's bank accounts and credit cards were not used in the period after he left home, and this data was incorporated into the investigative file as part of the comprehensive analysis of Andrew Keller's final activities before he lost contact with his family. After the analysis of Andrew Keller's financial activity showed no transactions occurring after he left home on the afternoon of May 17, 2004, investigators from the Volusia County Sheriff's Office conducted an overall assessment of the entire investigative file collected in the initial days and weeks since the disappearance was reported. The goal of this step was to compile all data, statements, and search results recorded to determine whether any investigative directions had not been fully explored. Investigators began by assembling all witness statements collected from the start of the investigation, including statements from Rachel Keller, other family members, acquaintances of Andrew Keller, as well as individuals who provided information related to the area where his Ford Explorer was found. All statement records were entered into the investigative file system and reviewed chronologically to ensure every detail was accurately documented. Investigators re-examined reports from patrol officers who participated in searches at Blue Spring State Park, reports from K-9 units, and reports from the dive team that checked the St. John's River area. Each report was cross-referenced with scene diagrams and area maps to confirm that search areas had been fully covered. After completing the compilation of witness statements and search reports, investigators moved to cross-referencing Andrew Keller's movement timeline on May 17, 2004. This timeline was constructed based on confirmed information from the family, phone call data, cell tower locations, and information related to the discovery of the Ford Explorer near Blue Spring State Park. Investigators started from the time Andrew left home in Deltona, around 5:30 p.m., then cross-referenced with call data showing he had contacted Derek Lawson before the planned meeting. The timeline also included the time Derek Lawson claimed the meeting between the two occurred near the park area. Data from Derek Lawson's interview was placed parallel to this timeline to assess the consistency between his statement and the objective facts investigators had collected. During cross-referencing, investigators checked each detail in Derek's statement, including the time he claimed to have met Andrew Keller, the time he left the area, and the travel route he said he used after the meeting. This information was compared with call data, geographic distances between locations, and initial verification results at locations Derek said he visited. Investigators noted that some details in Derek's statement aligned with confirmed facts, particularly that the two had communicated by phone before the meeting, and that Andrew had traveled to the area near Blue Spring State Park, where his Ford Explorer was later found. However, although Derek Lawson was the last known person to meet Andrew Keller before he disappeared, investigators found no direct physical evidence linking Derek to any harmful action against Andrew. No witnesses confirmed seeing any unusual incident between the two in the area near the park, and evidence collected during searches had not yet provided clear proof that a crime occurred at the scene. Financial data also showed no signs that Andrew Keller continued using his accounts after disappearing, but this information still could not provide direct evidence to charge any individual. After cross-referencing all witness statements, reconstructing Andrew Keller's movement timeline, and comparing it with Derek Lawson's statement, investigators concluded that although Derek was the last known person to meet the victim, the evidence available at that time was not strong enough to bring criminal charges against him or anyone else in Andrew Keller's disappearance. When all facts collected during the initial investigation phase had been reviewed once more, the Volusia County Sheriff's Office began the phase of overall assessment regarding the feasibility of continuing the investigation with the existing evidence. Over the many weeks since Andrew Keller was reported missing, the investigative agency had conducted a series of operations to locate the victim and reconstruct what may have happened after the meeting between Andrew and Derek Lawson. On the afternoon of May 17, 2004, Andrew's Ford Explorer had been found near Blue Spring State Park and thoroughly examined. The surrounding Pine Woods area had been searched with multiple ground teams and K-9 units. Riverbank areas along the St. John's had been checked by dive teams, and evidence found during searches had been collected and sent to the forensics lab for analysis. However, despite these efforts, investigators still could not determine Andrew Keller's location. No body was found in the search area, and there were no signs that Andrew had appeared anywhere after the day he left home for the meeting near Blue Spring State Park. The absence of a body made it difficult for investigators to precisely determine what happened to Andrew Keller, as there was no direct physical evidence of the cause or circumstances of death if a crime had occurred. In addition to the lack of a body, forensic analysis results on the Ford Explorer and evidence collected in the search area also did not provide clear evidence linking any individual to harmful actions against Andrew. Fingerprints collected from the vehicle showed no unusual traces beyond those possibly related to the victim's daily use of the vehicle, and evidence found in the Pine Woods area did not provide sufficiently strong forensic indicators to confirm a criminal act occurred at the location. Meanwhile, although Derek Lawson was identified as the last known person to meet Andrew Keller before he disappeared, investigators found no direct forensic evidence linking Derek to harming Andrew. Derek's statement about the meeting was recorded in the investigative file, and although he was the last contact with the victim, the objective facts collected at that time were insufficient to prove a crime had occurred or that Derek Lawson was directly involved in Andrew Keller's disappearance. Additionally, during the initial investigation, investigators found no direct witnesses who saw an incident occur between Andrew Keller and any other individual in the area near Blue Springs State Park on the afternoon or evening of May 17, 2004. Individuals interviewed in the area provided no information indicating an unusual event took place there during the relevant time frame. The lack of direct witnesses, combined with no body and no forensic evidence linking a suspect to a specific criminal act, left the investigation without new leads to advance. After considering all these factors, the Volusia County Sheriff's Office decided that the file on Andrew Keller's disappearance would be transferred to the Cold Case Unit, the unit responsible for managing unresolved investigative files when initial investigative directions have been pursued but have not yielded clear results about what happened to the victim. For many years after Andrew Keller's missing person file was transferred to the Cold Case Unit of the Volusia County Sheriff's Office, the case remained on the agency's list of unresolved files. No new information emerged for a long period after the initial investigation, and the file was stored along with other cases awaiting new leads that might clarify what happened to Andrew Keller after May 17, 2004. This situation continued until an unexpected event occurred many years later in the city of DeBary, located not far from the Deltona and Blue Springs State Park areas where the initial investigation had focused. On a morning during site preparation work for a construction project in DeBary, a group of workers excavating soil to lay foundations for a new structure on vacant land discovered an unusual object in the subsurface soil layer. Initially, the operator of the excavator noticed several fragments of material shaped unlike typical rocks or tree roots in the area. When the machinery stopped for inspection, one of the workers approached closer and realized these fragments resembled pieces of bone. Recognizing the possibility that these could be human bones, the workers immediately halted excavation at that spot to avoid disturbing the discovery area. The site supervisor was then informed of the find and quickly ordered all construction activity paused in the surrounding area. After a preliminary observation of the area where the bone fragments appeared, the site supervisor decided to contact authorities to report a potential discovery of human remains. A call was made to the Volusia County Sheriff's Office to report that workers at the construction site in DeBary had found bone fragments during excavation. When this information was received at the Sheriff's Office Dispatch Center, a patrol unit was dispatched to the construction site to assess the situation. Upon arrival, officers met the site supervisor and were led to the location where the workers had discovered the bone fragments. After observing the area, officers noted that portions of the bone fragments were still exposed in the excavated soil layer, and they determined the area needed to be treated as a potential scene involving human remains. Following investigative procedure, officers immediately requested the area around the discovery point be secured to prevent any activity that could disturb the scene. The construction site was temporarily closed, and workers were required to leave the area near the discovery while police proceeded with next steps. Police crime scene tape was placed around the excavated area where the bone fragments were found, and patrol officers were stationed to control access to the site to ensure no one approached before the specialized investigative team arrived. After determining the bone fragments could be human remains, patrol officers reported the discovery back to the Volusia County Sheriff's Office Dispatch Center and requested deployment of specialized units to the scene. Information about the discovery of remains at the construction site in DeBary was forwarded to the Investigative Division and Forensics Unit of the Sheriff's Office to prepare for more detailed examination at the scene. The discovery of bone fragments during construction work in DeBary thus quickly became an officially recorded event in the Volusia County Sheriff's Office reporting system, opening a new scene that required investigation to identify the remains found and the circumstances leading to their presence at the construction site. After the construction site in DeBary was secured and the Volusia County Sheriff's Office determined that the bone fragments discovered were likely human remains, specialized units from the investigative agency were dispatched to the scene to conduct a detailed examination. A forensics team, including scene technicians and forensic experts, was sent to the land where the initial discovery occurred. Upon arrival, the forensics team began by surveying the entire construction site to precisely identify the point where workers had found the bone fragments during excavation. This area was marked with scene marker stakes and documented photographically before any excavation activity took place. Photographic documentation included wide shots of the land, the location of the excavation pit, and close-up angles of where the bone fragments were exposed on the soil surface. After completing the initial condition documentation of the area, the forensics team began controlled excavation at the discovery point. Unlike the mechanical digging previously done during construction, the forensic excavation was performed using hand tools such as small shovels, trowels, and brushes to ensure that bone fragments and any related objects were not damaged during collection. Technicians started by removing thin layers of soil around the area where the bone fragments were initially observed, proceeding slowly, step by step, to determine the extent of the burial area. As the overlying soil was removed, additional bone portions gradually emerged beneath the surface. The forensics team paused excavation each time another bone fragment was uncovered to record its precise location within the excavation area. Small marker stakes were placed next to each bone fragment to mark its position before collection. After the location of each bone fragment was documented with photographs and scene diagrams, technicians carefully collected them. Each bone fragment was placed into separate evidence bags and sealed according to procedure to maintain the chain of custody. During continued excavation of the land, technicians also discovered several other objects near the bone area. These objects could include material fragments, clothing remnants, or small metal items embedded in the surrounding soil layer. Each discovered object was handled using the same procedure as for the bone fragments. Its position was marked, scene photographs were taken, and the evidence was collected with protective gloves before being placed into separate evidence bags. Concurrently with collecting bones and surrounding objects, the forensics team also measured and recorded the depth of the burial area relative to the current ground surface. A measuring tape was used to determine the distance from the ground surface to the location of the main bone fragments, and this information was noted in the scene report. Recording the depth of the bone fragments helped investigators better understand how the remains were buried or covered in this land. Technicians also created a detailed diagram of the excavation area showing the relative positions of each bone fragment and discovered objects around it. This diagram was combined with scene photographs to form a complete record of how the remains were found at the construction site in DeBerry. When the entire excavation area had been examined and the bone fragments along with related objects had been collected, all evidence was packaged and transported to the Volusia County Sheriff's Office Forensics Lab for subsequent examination steps to identify the remains and the circumstances leading to their presence at the construction site. When the bone fragments and objects collected from the excavation area at the construction site in DeBerry were transferred to the Volusia County Sheriff's Office Forensics Lab, they were handed over to the Forensic Anthropology Division for detailed analysis. Forensic experts began by examining each collected bone fragment to determine whether they belonged to a single individual. Before conducting in-depth analyses, all bone fragments were cleaned using standard procedures to remove adhering soil and natural materials from the scene. After cleaning was complete, the bone fragments were arranged on the examination table according to anatomical structure to identify the position of each part in the human skeleton. Forensic experts examined the shape, size, and structure of each bone fragment to confirm that these specimens were indeed human bone rather than animal bone or other natural material. Initial examination results showed that the bone fragments collected from the scene were all human bone and could be pieced together into portions of an adult human skeleton. After confirming the origin of the specimens, forensic experts began analyzing bone structure to gather basic biological information about the individual to whom these remains belonged. The analysis focused on bone parts with high value for determining biological characteristics, particularly the pelvis, skull, and long bones such as the femur and humerus. Morphological features of the pelvis were closely examined because this is one of the bone parts that allows sex determination with high accuracy. By analyzing the shape of the pelvic girdle and muscle attachment points on the bone, forensic experts determined that these remains belonged to a male individual. After determining sex, the next step in the anthropological examination was estimating the age of the individual at the time of death. Forensic experts examined features related to bone development and degeneration, including the condition of the ends of long bones, the degree of fusion of cranial sutures, and signs of wear on joint surfaces. These factors provided important indicators for estimating the relative age of the individual at death. Based on observed characteristics on the bone samples, forensic experts concluded that the remains belonged to an adult male aged approximately 30 to 40 years old. In addition to determining sex and age, the forensics division also estimated the time since death based on the preservation condition of the bone fragments and the degree of decomposition of any remaining biological materials. Factors such as bone color, surface erosion on the bones, and the influence of the soil environment where the remains were buried were all considered in this process. Additionally, forensic experts compared the condition of the remains with environmental data related to the debris area to estimate the period during which the remains may have been in the ground. After completing these analyses, the Forensic Anthropology Division issued a preliminary conclusion that the remains discovered at the construction site in debris belonged to an adult male aged approximately 30 to 40 years old, and that the decomposition characteristics of the bones indicated the individual had died many years before the remains were discovered. These examination results were recorded in the forensic report and forwarded to investigators at the Volusia County Sheriff's Office as part of the process to identify the remains and assess their potential connection to unresolved missing persons cases in the area. After the Forensic Anthropology Division determined that the remains discovered at the construction site in debris belonged to an adult male aged approximately 30 to 40 years old, with indications of having died many years earlier, investigators from the Volusia County Sheriff's Office began considering the possibility that these remains could be related to unresolved missing persons files in Volusia County. One of the files noted during the review was the disappearance of Andrew Keller, who vanished in May 2004 after a meeting near Blue Springs State Park and had never been found throughout the many years since the file was transferred to the cold case unit. To determine whether the newly discovered remains were related to Andrew Keller, the Forensics Division decided to conduct DNA analysis from bone samples collected at the debris scene. This process began by selecting bone samples with the best potential for preserving genetic material, typically thicker bone sections such as the femur or teeth, if present in the remains. Forensic lab technicians extracted DNA from these bone samples using specialized methods to obtain sufficient genetic material for analysis. After DNA was successfully extracted, forensic experts constructed a DNA profile from the remains sample. This profile included genetic markers commonly used in individual identification. While the DNA analysis of the remains was underway, investigators contacted the Keller family to inform them that the remains just discovered in debris could be related to Andrew Keller's disappearance and to request permission to collect DNA samples from family members for comparison purposes. Rachel Keller and other family members agreed to provide DNA samples as requested by the investigative agency. DNA samples from the Keller family were collected via buccal swabs, a common method for obtaining genetic material from living individuals. These samples were then sent to the forensic lab to build DNA profiles of the family members. After both DNA datasets were completed, forensic experts compared the DNA profile obtained from the remains with the DNA profiles of the Keller family. The comparison focused on determining the degree of similarity between genetic markers to establish whether the samples indicated a direct blood relationship. This is a widely used method in cases of remains identification when direct identifiers such as fingerprints or dental records are unavailable. The analysis results showed that the genetic markers in the DNA sample from the remains matched those from the Keller family at a high level of compatibility, consistent with a direct blood relationship. Forensic experts determined that this level of match was sufficient to conclude that the remains discovered at the construction site in debris belonged to Andrew Keller, who had been reported missing in Deltona on May 18, 2004. This conclusion was recorded in the official forensics report and forwarded to investigators at the Volusia County Sheriff's Office. The confirmation of the remains' identity as Andrew Keller marked the first time in many years that the investigative agency had obtained direct physical evidence related to the fate of the man who disappeared in 2004, while also providing a new basis for re-examining the entire investigative file related to his disappearance. After the forensics lab confirmed through DNA analysis that the remains discovered at the construction site in debris belonged to Andrew Keller, the Volusia County Sheriff's Office officially reopened the missing person file that had been archived many years earlier. The identification of the remains completely changed the status of the case, as for many years prior, the file had been handled solely as a missing person investigation without a body. Once Andrew Keller's identity was confirmed from the remains, the case was immediately shifted from archive status to a reopened investigative review phase. Andrew Keller's old file had been stored in the system of the Cold Case Unit, the division specializing in managing unresolved cases for the Volusia County Sheriff's Office. After receiving the official report from the Forensics Division regarding the DNA test results, the Cold Case Unit was assigned to take back the entire case to conduct new investigative evaluation steps. Investigators from the Cold Case Unit began by reviewing the forensic report on the discovery and excavation of the remains in Tabari, along with the anthropological examination results and DNA analysis confirming Andrew Keller's identity. This information was entered into the case file as new evidence directly related to Andrew's disappearance from 2004. After confirming that the remains found were indeed Andrew Keller, the Cold Case Unit leadership decided to form a new investigative team to re-examine every detail of the case. This team included investigators experienced in handling long-standing files and unresolved cases. One investigator was designated as team leader to coordinate subsequent investigative activities. The first task of the new investigative team was to gather the complete original missing person file from 2004 for a fresh review from the beginning. This file included all documents created during the initial investigation, such as missing person intake reports, witness interview transcripts, phone call records, examination results of the Ford Explorer found near Blue Spring State Park, reports from ground search teams, reports from K-9 units, and reports related to underwater search operations at the St. John's River. In addition, the file included records related to the verification of Derek Lawson's statement, the individual identified as the last person to meet Andrew Keller before he went missing. All these documents were retrieved from the Sheriff's Office archives and transferred to the new investigative team for case review. Investigators began reorganizing all documents chronologically to reconstruct the progression of the initial investigation. The goal of this step was to determine whether any details in the old file had been overlooked or not fully analyzed during the initial investigative phase. At the same time, investigators compared the old data with new information arising from the discovery of the remains in Tabari. Collecting and reassembling the complete 2004 file gave the new investigative team a comprehensive view of the entire initial investigation process, from the time Andrew Keller was reported missing until the case stalled and the file was transferred to the Cold Case Unit. However, the eventual identification of Andrew Keller's remains after many years created a significant turning point, compelling the investigative agency to re-examine the entire case in an entirely new context. Therefore, the Cold Case Unit of the Volusia County Sheriff's Office officially reopened the investigation to determine what really happened to Andrew Keller after the meeting near Blue Spring State Park and who might be responsible for his death. Immediately after the file was reopened and a new investigative team was formed to handle the case, investigators began the first critical step, re-examining all documents from the 2004 investigation. The goal of this step was to reassess every previously recorded detail and determine whether any elements had been overlooked or not fully analyzed in the new context. Now that the remains' identity had been confirmed, investigators therefore started by rereading all interview transcripts created during the initial investigative phase. These documents included statements from Rachel Keller, other family members, acquaintances of Andrew Keller, and especially the interview transcript of Derek Lawson, identified as the last person to meet Andrew before he disappeared on the afternoon of May 17, 2004. Investigators reviewed each interview record chronologically, paying attention to how questions were posed and the details witnesses provided in each interview. The objective of this process was to identify any discrepancies between statements or any details in witness statements that had not been fully analyzed during the initial investigation. During the review of Derek Lawson's interview transcript, investigators reread the entire content Derek presented about his meeting with Andrew Keller in the area near Blue Spring State Park. They rechecked the timelines Derek provided, including the time he claimed to have arrived at the park area, the duration of the meeting with Andrew, and the time he stated Andrew left the location. These details were noted for cross-referencing with other data in the file, including phone call records and scene search reports. In addition to reanalyzing interview transcripts, the team also reviewed all evidence collected during the initial investigation. This evidence included fingerprint samples collected from Andrew Keller's Ford Explorer, objects discovered in the Pine Woods area near Blue Spring State Park during the initial search, and forensic analysis reports conducted at that time. Investigators requested the Sheriff's Office Evidence Management Division to retrieve all case-related evidence from storage for re-examination Each piece of evidence was cross-referenced with the original scene report to confirm its origin and discovery location. Beyond re-examining the evidence itself, investigators also re-read prior forensic analysis reports to determine whether any indicators might need retesting using more modern analytical methods. Reviewing the evidence and forensic reports helped the team better understand what was established in the initial investigation and what remained unclear. As the file review continued, investigators identified several details in the 2004 file that had not been fully clarified during the initial phase. These details included gaps in the timeline of May 17, 2004, when no witnesses confirmed Andrew Keller's activities after his meeting with Derek Lawson, as well as elements not fully explained regarding the location where his Ford Explorer was found near Blue Springs State Park. Investigators noted these unresolved points in new investigative notes for further analysis in subsequent steps. Re-examining the entire 2004 file thus provided the cold case unit team with a more comprehensive picture of the initial investigation, while identifying lingering gaps that could become keys to new investigative directions. From these review results, investigators began shifting focus to a newly emerged element in the case: the land in DeBerry where Andrew Keller's remains were discovered. The identification of the remains made this location a pivotal point in the reopened investigation, as it was where Andrew's body had been buried for many years before being uncovered during construction work. To better understand the circumstances leading to the body's presence there, investigators began collecting and examining records related to the ownership of the land where construction workers discovered the remains. These records were obtained from Volusia County land management agencies and included information on individuals or entities that had held title to the land over the many years before the construction project began. Land ownership documents were arranged chronologically to determine who owned the land around 2004, the time Andrew Keller was reported missing. Investigators examined each land transfer record to identify when the property was bought, sold, or transferred between different individuals or entities. Beyond identifying official owners, the investigative team also reviewed information on land use in the years before construction started. Some land in the DeBerry area had been used for agriculture, material storage, or left vacant for extended periods before being sold to real estate developers. Therefore, investigators checked zoning reports and land use records to determine how the area had been utilized in the period before Andrew Keller's remains were discovered. This information could provide clues about who might have accessed the area around 2004. In addition to reviewing land ownership records, investigators worked to identify individuals who had access to the area in the years before construction began. This included previous landowners, those with temporary land use rights, and any individuals or organizations that had conducted activities on the land during that period. Investigators contacted local agencies to gather additional information on land lease agreements or temporary permits that may have been issued for the area. They also checked construction records related to the current project to determine when the land was sold to the developer and when site preparation activities began. This information was cross-referenced with the timeframe forensic experts estimated for Andrew Keller's death and burial on the land. Investigators compiled a list of individuals who had ownership or access rights to the land from the early 2000s until construction began. This list included previous landowners, those using the land for agriculture or storage, and any individuals potentially present in the area during the relevant time. Each person on the list was documented in the investigative file for further checking regarding possible connections to Andrew Keller's disappearance. At the same time, investigators examined the geographic distance between the DeBerry land and key locations in the 2004 file, including the Blue Springs State Park area, where Andrew Keller's Ford Explorer was found. Analyzing this geography helped investigators assess the feasibility of someone traveling from the presumed meeting area to the DeBerry land during the time related to Andrew Keller's disappearance. All information gathered from land ownership records and the list of those with access to the area was recorded in the cold case unit's new investigative report, providing a foundation for subsequent investigative steps to determine who might have transported Andrew Keller's body to the DeBerry land and buried it there for many years before its discovery. While the cold case unit investigative team analyzed the ownership history of the DeBerry land and identified individuals who had access to the area where Andrew Keller's remains were discovered, the Forensics Division of the Volusia County Sheriff's Office continued performing additional examinations on the skeletal remains to more clearly determine the victim's cause of death. In the initial anthropological analyses, experts had focused on determining sex, age, and estimated time since death based on bone structure and decomposition levels. However, once the remains were confirmed as Andrew Keller's, investigators requested further analyses to check for any signs of trauma on the skeleton that might indicate the cause of the victim's death. Forensic experts began by closely examining each bone fragment under specialized lighting and magnification to identify any abnormal signs on the bone surfaces. Each bone section was placed on the examination table and carefully observed for cracks, cuts, or any indications that the bone had sustained force before or at the time of death. Experts paid particular attention to critical bone regions such as the skull, ribs, and long bones, as these areas often record evidence of fatal trauma. During the skull examination, forensic experts discovered an abnormal area on a portion of the cranial bone. The bone surface at this location showed damage distinct from cracks caused by soil pressure or natural decomposition processes. To determine the nature of this mark, experts took close-up photographs and used measuring devices to analyze the shape of the injury on the bone. After completing initial checks, the Forensics Division decided to perform X-rays on the skull fragments to examine internal structure and determine whether any metal material or other characteristic trauma signs were present. X-ray images revealed a rounded structure at the injury site, with features typical of a penetrating bone wound. Forensic experts continued analyzing the injury shape by comparing it to documented trauma samples from forensic cases involving weapons. The analysis results showed that the injury on the skull matched characteristics of a gunshot wound. The edges of the injury were rounded, and bone deformation signs indicated impact from a high-velocity object, characteristic of firearm-related trauma. In addition to analyzing the primary injury on the skull, forensic experts also examined other bone sections in the remains to determine whether additional trauma signs existed. However, no clear evidence of fractures or other injuries was found on the remaining bone portions of the skeleton. Based on the analysis results, the Forensics Division concluded that Andrew Keller's remains showed evidence of a gunshot wound to the skull region. This finding was recorded in the Supplemental Forensic Examination Report and forwarded to the Cold Case Unit investigative team, determining that Andrew Keller exhibited signs of being shot before death, provided crucial forensic evidence indicating his death was likely the result of violent action, while also supplying a new basis for investigators to re-examine all case circumstances in the context of a criminal investigation into Andrew Keller's death. After the Forensics Division confirmed that Andrew Keller died from a gunshot wound, and this examination result was transferred to the Cold Case Unit, the investigative team began the next step of recross-referencing the entire case timeline with the new information regarding the location where the body was discovered in DeBerry. In the initial 2004 investigation, Andrew Keller's timeline was constructed based on family-provided information, phone call data, and Derek Lawson's statement. The individual identified as the last person to meet Andrew on the afternoon of May 17, 2004, near the Blue Springs State Park area. According to that timeline, Andrew left his home in Deltona around 5:30 p.m. for a business meeting, after which his Ford Explorer was found near Blue Springs State Park, and from that point no further confirmed information existed about his continued movement elsewhere. However, the discovery of Andrew Keller's remains on land in DeBerry introduced a new element that needed integration into the case timeline. Investigators began by determining the geographic distance between Blue Springs State Park, where Andrew's vehicle was found, and the DeBerry land where his remains were discovered. Area maps were used to identify possible routes connecting these two locations. Investigators noted that the distance between the two areas could be traveled by vehicle in a relatively short time via local roads linking Deltona, Blue Springs State Park, and DeBerry. This information indicated that geographically, movement from the meeting area near Blue Springs State Park to the DeBerry land was entirely feasible within the time frame after Andrew Keller was last seen. After establishing the geographic connection between the two sites, the investigative team continued cross-referencing the body's discovery location with timeline markers from 2004. They examined the period from when Derek Lawson stated the meeting with Andrew ended until the time Andrew's Ford Explorer was discovered. This interval became a significant gap in the timeline, as no witnesses confirmed Andrew Keller's activities during this phase. The discovery of remains in DeBerry prompted investigators to consider the possibility that Andrew Keller was removed from the Blue Springs State Park area after the meeting, and that his body was subsequently transported to the DeBerry land. To assess this possibility, investigators analyzed routes a vehicle could have used to travel between the two locations in 2004. They reviewed main roads and secondary roads connecting Blue Springs State Park to DeBerry, while evaluating the time required to complete the journey in the evening. These analyses showed that travel from the park area to the debris land could be accomplished in a relatively short period, depending on the route taken. In addition to route analysis, investigators also examined the feasibility of a suspect accessing the debris land around 2004. Information on land ownership and individuals with access rights collected in the previous investigative step was incorporated into the analysis. The goal of this step was to determine whether any individual connected to the initial investigation could have accessed the land where Andrew Keller's body was buried. Investigators noted that if a suspect had a vehicle and knowledge of the debris area, transporting the body from the Blue Spring State Park area to the discovery site was a plausible scenario within the 2004 timeline context. These analyses were recorded in the new investigative file as part of reconstructing possible events after the meeting between Andrew Keller and Derek Lawson, while helping the investigative team assess the likelihood that a suspect moved from the meeting area to the debris land to conceal Andrew Keller's body after his death. When the cold case unit investigative team completed cross-referencing the new timeline between the location where Andrew Keller's body was discovered in debris and the events recorded in the 2004 file, the next step in the investigation was to revisit witnesses who had been interviewed during the initial investigative phase. Investigators determined that after many years had passed, re-interviewing witnesses could yield new details or recollections that had not been mentioned in the original interviews. A witness list was recompiled based on the 2004 file, including Keller family members, acquaintances of Andrew Keller, individuals interviewed in the Blue Spring State Park area, and those who may have been near where Andrew's Ford Explorer was found. Investigators began contacting each witness on the list to arrange new interviews to update information related to the case. Some witnesses still lived in the Volusia County area and agreed to meet with investigators again to discuss what they remembered about Andrew Keller's disappearance. Interviews were conducted according to standard sheriff's office procedure, where investigators first reviewed old statement records to understand what witnesses had presented in 2004. They then asked follow-up questions to determine whether witnesses recalled any additional details about events at that time. During re-interviews, investigators paid particular attention to those who lived or worked near the Blue Spring State Park area in 2004, as this was where Andrew Keller's vehicle was discovered and considered the last point where the victim may have been seen. Some witnesses said they still remembered police conducting searches in the area when Andrew Keller was reported missing, but they did not recall seeing anything unusual on the evening of May 17, 2004. However, when asked again about activities in the area around that time, some witnesses provided minor additional details they had previously considered unimportant or not mentioned in initial interviews. Investigators documented all supplemental information witnesses provided and incorporated it into the new investigative file. In addition to witnesses in the Blue Spring State Park area, investigators re-interviewed those who knew Andrew Keller in his personal and professional life. These interviews aimed to determine whether Andrew had ever mentioned any issues related to business dealings, personal conflicts, or unusual events in the days before he disappeared. Witnesses were asked again about meetings Andrew had scheduled in the week before his disappearance, as well as any changes in his behavior or schedule at that time. During the collection of supplemental statements, investigators noted that although many witnesses could not recall every detail precisely after many years, some provided additional information related to activities in the area on the evening Andrew Keller disappeared. These new statements were carefully recorded and compared with existing facts in the 2004 file, including Andrew Keller's movement timeline and information related to his meeting with Derek Lawson. Each new piece of information was added to the investigative file to support reevaluation of the entire case context in the new investigative phase conducted by the cold case unit. After cold case unit investigators completed re-interviewing witnesses from the initial investigation, the next step was to re-examine Derek Lawson's statement in light of new facts that emerged after Andrew Keller's remains were discovered and identified. Derek Lawson had been identified from the beginning as the last person to meet Andrew Keller on the afternoon of May 17, 2004, near the Blue Spring State Park area. In the initial investigation, Derek provided an account of the meeting, stating that the exchange between the two proceeded normally before Andrew left. However, at that time, investigators had no body and no forensic evidence indicating Andrew Keller had been killed. The discovery of remains in debris, along with forensic results confirming Andrew Keller died from a gunshot wound, completely changed the investigative context. Investigators therefore began comparing details of Derek Lawson's 2004 statement with all new investigative data collected during the case reopening phase. Investigators retrieved the full record of Derek Lawson's initial interview from 2004 and analyzed each part of that statement. They paid particular attention to details regarding the time and location of the meeting between Derek and Andrew Keller. According to the 2004 statement, Derek said he met Andrew near Blue Spring State Park to discuss a business opportunity, and the meeting was brief before Andrew left the area. Derek asserted that Andrew left first, and he did not know where Andrew went afterward. When comparing this statement with new investigative data, investigators noted that certain elements of Derek's account required re-examination. The discovery of Andrew Keller's remains in DeBerry indicated the victim's body had been transported to a location some distance from the Blue Spring State Park area. This raised questions about the time between the meeting Derek described and when Andrew Keller completely vanished from witness view. Investigators rechecked timelines in Derek's statement and compared them with the geographic distance between Blue Spring State Park and DeBerry, as well as the time needed to travel between the two locations by vehicle. The analysis showed that if Andrew Keller had been shot and his body subsequently taken to the DeBerry land, this would have occurred in the period after the meeting where Derek Lawson was the only known person present with Andrew. Investigators also re-examined details in Derek's statement regarding his departure from the area after the meeting. In the 2004 file, Derek said he left the area and returned to his residence, but no direct witnesses confirmed his travel route during that period. When comparing these details with new information from body discovery location analysis and routes connecting Blue Spring State Park to DeBerry, investigators noted that the timeline Derek provided did not clearly account for the period after his meeting with Andrew Keller. Additionally, some details in Derek's statement about meeting timing were cross-referenced with phone call data collected in the initial investigation. Investigators found that while call data confirmed Derek and Andrew communicated before the meeting, no information confirmed what occurred after they met at the park area. These timeline gaps became the focus of the new investigative analysis. After comparing Derek Lawson's entire statement with new facts from forensic examination, body discovery location, and travel route analyses between relevant sites, investigators noted that certain elements of Derek's statement did not fully explain possible events after his meeting with Andrew Keller, and these unresolved points were flagged in the investigative file as potential inconsistencies requiring clarification in the next investigative phase. After cold case unit investigators completed reanalyzing Derek Lawson's statement and identified several inconsistencies between the 2004 statement and new investigative data, the Volusia County Sheriff's Office decided to summon Derek Lawson to headquarters for a second interview regarding Andrew Keller's case. The discovery of Andrew Keller's remains in DeBerry, along with forensic results confirming the victim died from a gunshot wound, created an entirely new investigative context compared to when Derek was first interviewed in 2004. In the initial investigation, investigators had no body and no forensic evidence of homicide, so the prior interview primarily focused on determining what occurred during the meeting between Derek and Andrew near Blue Spring State Park. However, in the new context with Andrew Keller's death confirmed, investigators prepared a new interview to clarify details related to the meeting between the two and possible subsequent events. Derek Lawson was contacted and required to come to Volusia County Sheriff's Office to answer additional questions about the case. When Derek arrived at headquarters, investigators conducted the interview in a recorded and videoed interview room per standard procedure. The interview began with investigators reminding Derek that he had been interviewed during the initial 2004 investigation and that his meeting with Andrew Keller on May 17, 2004 was a key detail in the case file. After this introduction, investigators informed Derek that during the case reopening, the agency had discovered and identified remains belonging to Andrew Keller on land in DeBerry. This information was presented as a new element in the investigation. Investigators also explained that forensic results showed Andrew Keller died from a gunshot wound. After presenting this information, investigators began questioning details related to the meeting between Derek and Andrew at Blue Spring State Park. They asked Derek to recount what happened on the afternoon of May 17, 2004, including the time the two met, the content of their discussion, and when Derek said Andrew left the area. During the interview, investigators progressively presented some evidence and new investigative data collected after the file reopening. This included the location where Andrew Keller's body was found in DeBerry, forensic results determining cause of death as gunshot, and analyses of travel routes between Blue Spring State Park and the DeBerry land. Investigators also noted that Derek's original statement had been compared with new data and that some elements of the May 17, 2004 timeline remained unexplained. The interview's goal was to give Derek an opportunity to provide further explanation for these details in light of the new information added to the file. Throughout the interview, investigators continued asking questions to clarify time gaps between the meeting Derek described and when Andrew Keller vanished from all witness sight. These questions focused on precisely determining Derek's activities after the meeting ended, as well as any information that might explain how Andrew Keller's body ultimately appeared on land in DeBary many years later. The entire interview content was documented and added to the investigative file as part of continuing to clarify events on the day Andrew Keller disappeared. When the second interview with Derek Lawson concluded and the full interview content was added to the investigative file, the Cold Case Unit investigative team proceeded to compile all evidence collected during the reopening of Andrew Keller's case. Investigators prepared a comprehensive investigative report, including forensic examination results, analyses of the body discovery location in DeBary, reviews of the 2004 file, supplemental witness statements, and inconsistencies identified in Derek Lawson's statement. This report was prepared for presentation to the Volusia County Grand Jury, a legal procedure used to evaluate whether existing evidence provides sufficient basis to bring criminal charges against an individual. In preparation for the grand jury presentation, investigators and prosecutors collaborated to reorganize the entire file chronologically, according to the case events. The file began with Andrew Keller leaving his home in Deltona on the afternoon of May 17, 2004, to meet Derek Lawson, followed by the discovery of Andrew's Ford Explorer near Blue Spring State Park, search operations conducted in the following days, and the decision to transfer the file to Cold Case Unit when the initial investigation found no body or sufficient evidence to charge anyone. The file then continued with events many years later, when construction workers in DeBary discovered remains during excavation. The forensics team's scene excavation process, anthropological examination, and DNA testing confirming the remains belonged to Andrew Keller. Prosecutors also presented to the grand jury supplemental forensic results showing Andrew Keller died from a gunshot wound. In addition to forensic evidence, investigators presented investigative analyses related to the May 17, 2004 timeline, including Derek Lawson's identification as the last person to meet Andrew Keller before he disappeared. Prosecutors explained to the grand jury that Derek Lawson's original 2004 statement had been compared with new investigative data collected after Andrew Keller's remains were discovered. During the presentation, prosecutors highlighted inconsistencies between Derek Lawson's statement and new facts related to the body discovery location in DeBary, as well as travel route analyses between Blue Spring State Park and the discovery site. Additionally, investigators presented results of the re-interview of Derek Lawson during the new investigative phase, in which Derek was informed of Andrew Keller's remains discovery and forensic results confirming gunshot cause of death. After all evidence and investigative analyses were presented, the grand jury reviewed the file to determine whether the facts provided sufficient legal basis to issue criminal charges. After deliberation, the grand jury concluded that the presented evidence was sufficient to approve an arrest warrant for Derek Lawson in connection with Andrew Keller's death. This decision was officially recorded, and the arrest warrant was issued by the court upon the prosecutor's request. After the warrant was approved, Volusia County Sheriff's Office investigators coordinated with law enforcement units to execute the arrest of Derek Lawson. Derek Lawson was subsequently arrested and placed into county detention to await further legal proceedings related to charges in Andrew Keller's case. After Derek Lawson was arrested pursuant to the court warrant and charged in connection with Andrew Keller's death, the case proceeded to trial in Volusia County Court. In preparation for trial, prosecutors built the prosecution file based on all evidence collected during the initial 2004 investigation, as well as new evidence that emerged after Andrew Keller's remains were discovered in DeBary. When the trial began, the prosecutor presented to the jury the forensic evidence central to the case. This presentation started with a description of the remains discovery process at the construction site in DeBary, followed by the forensics team's scene excavation steps. Forensic experts were called to explain in court the methods used to collect and preserve bone samples at the scene, as well as the anthropological examination process conducted after the remains were transferred to the lab. The prosecutor then presented DNA analysis results used to identify the remains. Forensic experts explained the DNA extracted from bone was compared with DNA samples from Keller family members, and the results showed a genetic match consistent with a direct blood relationship, thereby confirming the remains found in DeBary were Andrew Keller's. After establishing the victim's identity, the prosecutor continued presenting supplemental forensic results related to Andrew Keller's cause of death. Forensic experts explained that detailed skull analysis revealed characteristics of a gunshot wound. X-ray images of the skull were shown to the jury to illustrate the penetrating bone injury, and the morphological features of the wound were described as typical signs of bullet trauma. After presenting forensic evidence, the prosecutor moved to reconstructing the case timeline to explain to the jury the events of May 17, 2004. The timeline presentation began with Andrew Keller leaving his home in Deltona for a business meeting with Derek Lawson. The prosecutor presented phone call data confirming Andrew and Derek communicated before the meeting. They then described the discovery of Andrew's Ford Explorer near Blue Spring State Park and search operations conducted in the area after Andrew was reported missing. The prosecutor explained that Derek Lawson was identified as the last person to meet Andrew Keller before he disappeared. Derek's statements from 2004 were presented in court along with new investigative analyses conducted after the file reopening. The prosecutor continued presenting the discovery of Andrew Keller's body in DeBerry, and analyses showing the burial site could be accessed via routes connecting to the Blue Spring State Park area. The next part of the trial focused on presenting possible motive leading to Andrew Keller's death. The prosecutor introduced information related to the business relationship between Andrew Keller and Derek Lawson, including transactions and the meeting arranged on the day Andrew disappeared. Investigators were called to testify, explaining that the meeting between the two was the last confirmed activity on May 17, 2004, and that Derek Lawson was the last known person to see Andrew Keller before his death. By combining forensic evidence, event timeline, and factors related to the relationship between victim and defendant, the prosecutor argued to the jury that the investigative file evidence indicated Derek Lawson was directly involved in Andrew Keller's death. After both the prosecution and defense completed their presentations at the trial of Derek Lawson regarding Andrew Keller's death, the judge instructed the jury to retire to deliberate and consider all evidence and testimony presented throughout the trial. In the jury room, jurors began deliberation by reviewing key case points, including forensic evidence, the timeline of events on May 17, 2004, and details related to the meeting between Andrew Keller and Derek Lawson near Blue Spring State Park. A significant part of deliberation involved evaluating the forensic examination results presented in court. Jurors reviewed expert testimony on the remains excavation in DeBerry, DNA analysis confirming victim identity, and especially the conclusion that Andrew Keller died from a gunshot wound. This evidence played a crucial role in establishing that Andrew Keller's death resulted not from accident or natural causes, but from violent action. In addition to forensic evidence, the jury re-examined the case timeline as presented by the prosecutor. According to this timeline, Andrew Keller left home in Deltona on the afternoon of May 17, 2004, to meet Derek Lawson, and Derek was the last confirmed person to see Andrew before he disappeared. Jurors discussed the period after the meeting between the two, a time when no witnesses confirmed Andrew Keller was alive or present anywhere else. The subsequent discovery of Andrew Keller's body on land in DeBerry many years after his disappearance was also considered a key factor in reconstructing possible events after the meeting. The jury reviewed investigative analyses showing the body discovery site could be reached by vehicle from Blue Spring State Park in a relatively short time. These factors were incorporated into discussion as jurors weighed the prosecutor's arguments that Derek Lawson may have been involved in causing Andrew Keller's death and then transporting the body to the DeBerry land. During deliberation, jurors also reviewed Derek Lawson's statements from the initial 2004 investigation, as well as information presented during the re-interview when the case file was reopened. These statement records were compared with new investigative facts, including body discovery location and travel route analyses between key case sites. After reviewing all evidence and testimony presented at trial, the jury proceeded to vote on a verdict. After hours of discussion, the jury reached consensus on its conclusion. When the jury returned to the courtroom, the judge asked the foreperson to stand and announce the verdict. In the presence of the court, prosecutor, defense attorney, and members of the victim's family, the jury foreperson read the jury's verdict. The jury declared Derek Lawson guilty in connection with Andrew Keller's death, based on evidence presented at trial. This verdict marked the first time after many years since Andrew Keller's disappearance that the justice system officially determined criminal responsibility in the case. After the guilty verdict was announced, the trial moved to the sentencing phase. The judge considered prosecutor recommendations as well as legal factors related to sentencing for the offense Derek Lawson was convicted of. During this process, The court also noted that Andrew Keller's case had spanned many years before resolution, beginning as a missing person file without a body until remains were discovered and victim identity confirmed through DNA analysis. After considering case factors and the jury's verdict, the judge sentenced Derek Lawson to life imprisonment as prescribed by law. This sentence was imposed as punishment for Derek Lawson's role in Andrew Keller's death. When the sentence was pronounced in the courtroom, Andrew Keller's case officially closed in the justice system after many years since he left home in Deltona for a business meeting in May 2004 and subsequently disappeared. The court's decision marked the conclusion of a years-long investigation that began with the initial missing person report, went through cold case status, and was ultimately reopened after Andrew Keller's remains were discovered in DeBerry. If you want to continue following cold cases solved after many years of silence like Andrew Keller's story, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss upcoming investigative files. Thank you for watching to the end, and we'll see you in the next video with another mysterious case still waiting to be uncovered.